Yeah, at 1:18, like to call the Finance Committee meeting to order. To begin by acknowledging that we are privileged to meet on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Snohomish and Stallion Nations. And there is an agenda recommendation. And you'll see in the red we're going to change the order a little bit, correct?
Yes.
And that's it. We're not changing anything else.
Yeah.
So would it be an amended agenda then for changing the order?
I guess you can follow that.
Anyone prepared to make that recommendation?
Sure. That the amended agenda of this meeting be approved.
Perfect, thank you. Second. Thank you, April. Objections? Thanks. Seeing and hearing none, and we can move on. We have a set of minutes there as well.
That the minutes from the Finance Committee meeting held on June the 14th, 2023 be adopted.
Thank you, Cynthia. Second. Thank you, Rachel. Any objections? Seeing and hearing none, that's carried. I don't believe there are any trustee items for this section. So financial statements audit. Lanto, are you taking the lead on that as well?
I believe so. Yeah, I can confirm that we have audited the financial statements of the school district number 48 Sea to Sky. And in our opinion, the financial statements of the district year ended June 30th, 2023 are prepared in all material respects in accordance with section 23.1 of the Budget Transparency and Accountability Act of the province of British Columbia. I think that's all I need to say.
Okay. We don't.
Yeah,
No?
no, I'm gonna go through some highlights.
Okay.
And I know that, you guys are welcome to stay for as long as you want for the meeting. So I'm gonna be going through the some variance analysis over the financial statements, then the financial discussion and analysis. So you're welcome to stay for both those pieces if you want, or I'll leave that up to you. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think we will drop off, but appreciate the time and thanks for having us.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Okay,
Bye.
thank you, everyone. Bye.
This was gonna go long.
I feel like a lot of those.
It's like,
Okay.
oh, wait. Okay, you're gonna pick up from here?
Yeah, so I'm going to just bear with me because I'm just going to be pulling up the financial statements, and I'm not going to go through everything because I'm just going to go through a few variances, and then I'm going to go through the financial statement discussion analysis document because it actually does like a really good job of going through some of that stuff anyways. So I'm just going to pull this up. Second here. Okay. So these are our financial statements. The first couple of pages is just like just the schedule here. There's a draft management report, which we have finalized today. So we'll have the actual one in there today, after today. Okay, so the first statement here is a statement of financial position, otherwise known as, you may hear people call it the balance sheet. So that's what this is. And what I've done is just what I've done for this past 3 years is just put together some variance analysis on any changes from that are over $1 million. And that's for the statement of financial position. We don't budget for balance sheet items. We only budget for a statement of operations, or you might hear it being called the income statement. So there's no budget column on this page. What you'll see is there's actually two columns here. One is the actual column here for what happened last year, and then the second column is the previous year actuals. Okay, so on this actual statement itself, there is no there's actually only one account that had a change that was over $1 million from the previous year. and that is cash and cash equivalents. So you'll see that the cash equivalents decreased by 1.7 million. About 10%. And so to explain the reason why cash and cash equivalents have has decreased is quite complicated, because it's just a moment in time of like what your bank balance is. So things things are deposited into your bank account and are taken out at like different times. So it's just a timing difference between, you know, what happened at this time last year. So that's really the reason why it's a timing difference for cash. Any questions on that? Okay, so I'll move to the next sheet. So this is a statement of operations. So basically this makes up like all our revenues and expenses for capital, operating grants, special purpose funds, like everything, it's consolidated. And we have 3 columns here. So the first column is the budget. Second column is actual expenses from last year. And then the third column is what happened in the previous year. So the first thing I'm going to do is just go over any changes from what we budgeted. So this is our original budget. I just want to point out too, this is not the amended budget that we approved. This is original budget. And the reason why we always have to report back on the original budget is because that's according to PSAS, Public Sector Accounting Standards. You're always required to do like present on your original budget, even if you're amending it during the year. That's a requirement for Public Sector Accounting Standards. So just so everybody's aware, if like, oh, that doesn't look familiar to me, that's not what I remember passing in February. That's because it's the one we passed in June, 2 years ago almost now, right? Yeah. So for anything that's over $1 million changes, so revenue, it should be no surprise that so I'm doing budget I'm actually going to be right now comparing what we budgeted, this column, to what we actually ended up having, right? So basically it should be no surprise to anybody that our provincial grants ended up being higher than what we budgeted. And so the difference is actually 4.5 million, which is 7%. And a lot of that, like 2.3 million of that, so pretty much almost half of that, or a little bit more than half of that's related to labor settlement. So those are those collective agreements that we settled in the last year for teachers and support staff. We also received an additional 0.9 million in operating grants. So a little bit more than what we were originally budgeted for. And we also received 1.4 million in special purpose fund grants. So that would be grants such as like that student and family affordability grant that we got last year. So we had like this would be a number of grants that we got during the year that we originally hadn't put in the budget, because they kind of came up after the fact. Okay. So that's for provincial grants. And the next piece would be any changes over 1 million would be on the expenses side. There's nothing else on the revenue side. That's over 1 million. So for expenses, the first one would be instruction. This instruction line here. So expenses were higher than what we budgeted by 2.9 million. And as we mentioned, we had a labor settlement. So there was 6.75% negotiated increase for teachers' pay. And actual expenses ended up being higher by 2.9 million than what we budgeted for. So that is why that's a little bit off. But I think it's pretty accurate overall. So good job.
Can you speak to the district administration as well? Because I think there's a misunderstanding that district administration means district staff, when in fact, while that is, yes, a part of that, that's also all the coverage for folks from the ILT or district teacher teams. When they go out to schools, they get coverage by TOCs. We have our leadership meetings, and principals are covered by their teachers in charge. And so with the settlement as well, those costs would have gone up as well. So I just want to clarify that. That's another one. It's not a million, but it's pretty close. And the public might have some questions. As to
Yeah, I think-
why is that?
I
much
think
higher?
that one was, yeah, like from what we budgeted was about, I think 800,000 off or something like that for the district administration. So it wasn't actually on my list of things over where there was a difference of $1 million, but Chris is right, like. Our district administration cost does include release time for principals or vice principals, or even teachers, if they're coming to like a district training course or something like that, it actually gets coded to district administration instead of instruction. Whereas in other districts, it's could be considered to be instruction. So anyways, that's just something to think about. Right? Okay.
Comment if I may.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think that just based on what we've witnessed in terms of going into the schools as well, something that's valued within this district is the collaborative support and providing those strong mentors for junior teachers so that there is that knowledge translation across the years of experience. And so this is somewhere that the investment that the district has made in that sort of thing will show up on our financial statements. This is the area that that sort of thing will show up on, which is what is trying to get at.
Really appreciate you mentioning that. In fact, I can share again that last year we actually had 18 FTE of teachers spread across all of our schools for that collaborative support amount, and that's well over 1.8. I can't remember the average class teacher now, 100 and something, but there's at least 1.8 million of that is towards that support. So thank you for bringing that up. I forgot to mention that.
April?
I just want to ask a question about that. Is it captured on district administration? I was under the impression that it came from a different fund. And so, but maybe you're talking about the release time for the teachers to work with those teams. Is that what
Yes.
we capture in our district admin?
Yeah, so anytime there's opportunities for teachers to support other teachers, whether that's in schools.
Right.
At district events, as you know, we support ton of professional learning in our district where we can. And that's coded to that. We can do a deeper dive.
Talking to the mic.
Oh, sorry.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Yes, I was just reiterating that anytime we have teacher release where it's connected to district initiatives, and class support teachers is one of those initiatives that is coded to district administration. And as Danielle said, maybe the case other districts code that to instruction, and it's just been our practice to do it that way. And it may be something we want to think about changing if it's causing some confusion for folks.
But the actual 18 positions are not captured in this line.
No,
Correct.
they're in.
They're in Article 75 is what I understood.
Well, again, so just to be clear, there's differences between so I'm learning this object and function of where things are
Right.
coded. So so instruction is captures most of those items, so the teacher cost is in there. So Article 75 is within instruction.
So it's
But
not
the
within
release-
district. No.
but the release time
Right.
for that, which there is all year long a ton, is all captured in district administration.
Got it.
Okay,
Thank you.
good.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I think so.
Okay, great. Okay, and okay, then the next line item here is for things over $1 million is operations and maintenance. So this line item right here. And so our actuals were higher by 1.5 million. It's about 13%. That's compared to our budget. And the increase, we had an increase in salaries and benefits of 0.7 million. So that's also in line with the labor settlements that we had. And there was also an increase of services and supplies, which that's not a surprise because of our inflation has been really out of this world. And then also we had a little bit more an increase to amortization than we originally budgeted for. So That means we amortized more of our capital assets than we expected. So that's budget to actuals. And then the next piece, I'll go actual to actual. So like the current year to the previous year. So,
Quick question, because this came up, while you guys were out of the room. And then Lisa, feel free to jump in if I miss. But these figures all are inclusive of the school-based budgets, correct?
correct.
We were wondering about perhaps a session on talking specifics, how that works, how the allocations work.
Yeah, we actually have it down as a board education session for this year. So we
Perfect.
will be going over
Great.
that.
Thank
All
you.
right. Yep. Yeah.
Good.
Okay, great. Awesome. Looking forward to that. Okay, so
As am I. Sorry. The numbers. I want to see how it all works. Sorry.
all right. So
Not excited.
I'm excited.
Oh, I am. I get excited about these things. I want
happy
to
to talk
know.
numbers any day, any
Yeah.
day.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So I'm just gonna go jump back in here. So I'm gonna do a comparison of last year's actual expenses compared to the prior year 2022 expenses. And so this the two things that come up here again. So on the revenue side, provincial grants, obviously they're going to be higher than the previous year. So they were higher by 3.4 million. And a lot of that had to do with the labor settlement. So 2.3 million of that's related to labor settlement. And also we had an additional 0.2 million in operating grants over the prior year and an additional 1 million in special purpose funds. As mentioned, those are things such as the Student Family Affordability Fund. So that was brand new last year. That's on the revenue side. And then anything over $1 million on the expense side here. So that's just instruction. And so similar theme here, those expenses increased by 3 million from the prior year. 2.7 of that's related to negotiated salary and benefit increases for teachers and support staff. And also there was a slight increase in supplies and services for 0.4 million. And the instruction. So any questions there? Any questions on the financial statements at all?
It's not really related. Different question. It's okay. I'll ask it later.
Okay,
It's not totally related.
so if everyone's okay for me to move on, I'd like to go over the financial statement discussion analysis, and a lot of it's related to what we've heard from the auditors about the ARO and also these financial statements specifically. Is it okay if I move on to that? Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
So just 1 second here. I'm just opening it up right now.
Okay.
Thanks. I have notes. Okay, so I'm just going to walk everybody through page by page. So this is obviously just a title page. Okay, so for the financial statement discussion analysis, this is a ministry requirement. This is our second year doing it. Some of you may recall seeing this document last year. It's the same document, we've updated it slightly. So I'm going to go over some highlights with you, and Chris or Elena, whoever can jump in if there's anything else that you have questions about or they want to add anything. So the first page here is it just goes over like the standard accounting practices and the policies that we have to follow. So I'm not going to go in details on that for you. That's just something that accountants have to do. The next piece here is in relation to this new accounting standard that we had heard from the auditors about. So this new accounting standards on asset retirement obligation, and we talked about it a few times over the years. So this concept shouldn't be new to anybody, but basically the standard ensures that we recognize the cost of what it would be to remove asbestos from our buildings. And So as a result of the new standard, we're required to set up a liability and decrease our capital accumulated surplus by 6 million, the 6,195,673. So just to put it in perspective, I know the auditors, this was in the audit report, but just to put this in perspective, our capital accumulated, our capital accumulated surplus previous to this year was close to $12 million. So it's literally cut our capital surplus in half. So I just wanted to show you, explain to you that it is a significant transaction for a school district. But thankfully we had a good chunk of money in there, but that just goes to show you this is a significant change, right?
Mhm.
So I just wanted to point that out. Any questions for anyone?
Can I jump in?
Is this where you wanted me to ask?
That-
Sorry,
Uh,
is this
if
where
I
you
may-
wanted me to ask about that question? Sorry, I can't see all of you. I'm really sorry. Getting a clearer picture on where our lead and asbestos is through Ian on another agenda would be
So
something I'd like
I
to.
can respond to that. So
Okay,
just
awesome.
for clarity for everyone in the public as well. The $6 and change $1 million number is strictly based on a per square foot amount
Mhm.
as established by the province of BC, where we're simply, and all districts are simply looking at every building that they have.
Yeah.
And any square footage previous to 1990 is the amount. So it's not, there's no deep dive into ripping into walls yet, or looking for lead content or anything. The expectation of the government with this new standard is simply that we multiply the square footage of building area from 1990 and before, and multiply by the standard. And they believe that to be your nest egg, so that if we do any projects, for example, we're waiting to hear if we're successful with the seismic upgrade at House on Secondary and expansion, that will require some building. And if in the removal of a wall to do an expansion, we find asbestos, we have this money set aside to pay for that. And once that's done, whatever the new square footage is, if we've replaced any of the existing, that amount actually comes off of our liability. So as we upgrade our buildings over time, our liability will also decrease because we've remediated the issue. So there is no follow-up on terms of facilities to do a deeper dive at this point in time, until such time as we do a expansion or a rebuild of an existing structure.
That's perfect. Thank you for that.
Got it.
Cynthia?
So the money that's going into that nest egg came from surplus. So do we have a plan to increase our surplus again?
I think it's actually pretty healthy capital
Okay.
surplus right now, so I'm not too worried about that.
Oh, okay,
But we'll see a little bit more when we go over the 3-year financial plan.
okay,
We can talk about that later.
okay, perfect.
I just realized that I'm not sharing my screen. I thought I was, so I apologize. I am gonna pull it up, so I'm walking you through. what
Okay.
I'm
I was
seeing,
gonna, I'm like,
sorry, guys. I'm sorry about that. Just 1 second here.
So did that, trustee Turpin, did I answer your question sufficiently?
Yes, you did.
Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Okay, so just go over some financial highlights here. Our local education act with Lil Want Nation came into effect in the 2022-23 school year, so that's great. We had, after many years of collaboration with the school district, Lil Want Nation and the province, school district donated the Coast Mountain Outdoor School to Lil Want Nation, so that happened last fall. And as mentioned, we had a labor settlement funding. So that was a huge task and very welcomed increase to salaries for everybody. We had international program enrollments, revenues. And I'm just going to go over our new special purpose funds. So I mentioned some of these earlier when I was talking about variance analysis. So we did receive 550,000 for student family affordability, 175,000 for early care and learning. And then also the early childhood educator dual credit for 70,000. And that's actually the 70,000 that was shared between us and Sunshine Coast. So that's a split program between the two school districts.
The Student and Family Affordability Fund. Which one is that one again?
So that's the one, it got announced last fall. It was announced last fall and it's $550,000. And there's that was where we gave mostly gift cards out for grocery stores to all the schools. And then also we had given money to the food banks.
Okay, that's what I thought.
But it wasn't just for food, like it could be used for field trips, school fees, and it could be used for school supplies,
Clothing.
clothing, yeah.
Okay.
So
So I think the initial announcement was last September.
that's right.
And it was geared to food.
Yes,
But then I know they changed things afterwards.
they added, yeah. So it was allowed to be used for that. We have about $50,000 left over, but we also have the new food program that was announced. That's 660,000 or something like
And
that.
that's
for this year.
ongoing, that one.
That one's ongoing, yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
So that's exciting. Okay. And then financial performance indicators. So I'm not going to go through these couple paragraphs here because they just kind of talk about in general, like what the financial terms are here. But what I will say is that for June 30th, 2023, the district's expenses exceeded the revenues. So we were in a deficit of $876,211. And what I do want to mention is that the deficit is made up of both operating, like right here, you can see operating and capital dollars. So we had an operating deficit of 1.2 million. But then we also had, that's offset by a capital surplus of 343,546. So them together it equals the $876,211. And so as a result, the deficit the accumulated operating surplus decreased from 5.2 million to 4 million as of June 30th. And so that's operating only. Okay. So our accumulated surplus is 10 million. So obviously 4 million of that's made up out of operating. And then the other the other 6 million is capital. So the next chart shows you exactly what I'm saying. So I'll just let up here.
Can you just clarify for the public? I know it's in the report and it's written down, but just in case folks are listening and not looking at the screen. We had budgeted for
A deficit.
Yes, we budgeted for a 1.139620 deficit purposely when we passed the budget. And again, of that, we actually spent 876.
876.
So we were very fortunate. I mean, I shouldn't say we're very fortunate because part of that was not being able to have TOCs in classrooms. So there was savings there. So I shouldn't say fortunate because it's not fortunate for our kiddos or our teachers.
Yeah.
But the fact is, just so again, public's clear, this was a budgeted
Deficit.
shortfall or deficit. We didn't end a deficit. I know you said that, but I
Yeah.
know the word deficit sends alarm bells to lots of folks. So to be clear.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. We budgeted 1.1 million. We ended up at 876,000. To be honest, a lot of it did have to do with sick leave. So we are going to be revisiting that when we look at our budget for this year. Okay, so basically this graph shows you our accumulated surplus. And so this accumulated surplus graph shows both operating and capital surplus dollars. So the 6 million here. So remember before I mentioned to you guys that 12 million. It used to be 12 million for capital, so you can see now it's at 6. And then we're at 4 million for operating. And operating actually is further broken down here to these, it's two colors here. The accumulated operating surplus, restricted, so that means it's restricted for a certain program. And then unrestricted is the green one here. That's 1.6 million. Okay, so that's where we're sitting at as of June 30th. Okay, let me see.
I might be totally confused.
Yes,
So the 1.6 of unrestricted surplus, we used a bunch of the unrestricted surplus last year, right?
yes,
100 and whatever.
I think, yeah, Elena, is that right? It came out of the deficit would have come out of, yes. Was some of that restricted though?
No,
You
that's
need the
not, yeah,
microphone.
that, well, it shouldn't be.
The deficit. Oh, Elena just needs them. Elena, there's my.
Hello, can you hear me? No? There's surplus or deficit, accumulated surplus or deficit is a total. Then internally we figure out which portion is restricted and which is not. It's not budgeted this way because we don't know until the actual results come in. So those unrestricted portions and restricted portions, those are our funds carry forwards that we track internally, like Ministry of Education plan or PROD funds, those kind of funds. So once we know how much we actually spent and how much we had carry forward in the beginning, how much we got new funding, how much we spent, we know new carry forward. And then we figure out what is internally restricted portion of operating accumulated surplus. It changes every year, and we are not spending only either unrestricted or restricted. We just spend in operating funds, and then we determine which portion of it is internally restricted. It's a note 18, notes to financial statements, if you need more details, what our restricted and unrestricted portions comprised.
Okay, so that wasn't necessarily my question. What I'm wondering is it okay if we budgeted for an 800 or 1 point whatever $1 million, but it ended up being over 800,000 deficit? Is that ongoing? Because we can't manage that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in the 3-year plan.
Okay.
You'll see it there and then we'll have to discuss that. But yes, agree.
Okay,
But this is the year end though, so the deficit that we spent is accounted for in year. So that's what I'm saying, we're not still carrying forward a 1.1 deficit, it was accounted for. And after paying it off with accumulated surplus, this is what's remaining, 6 of the
Yeah,
4, correct?
6 in the 4.
Yes.
That's
yeah,
right.
no, I understand that. I'm just saying that if it's like, okay, if we're planning for a deficit, depending on what we spent that on, are we going to need to do that again?
Yeah.
And we can't sustain that.
That's
for
correct.
Very long, was where I was getting.
Yep. I agree.
That, as
Agree.
part of our 3-year plan.
Agree. And that's just something we're gonna have to keep working with. Okay. So I'm not gonna read all of this stuff. I'll just go to the next page here. So this is a pretty great graph we have here. So this shows the number of, in orange here, the full-time equivalents, so the number of students we have. And then the blue line here is accumulated surplus. So this is exactly shows you the direction. So previously, this is a 10-year graph. We were going down here. And then we started going back up here, and then we dipped down here again. So as Rebecca said, we can't continually keep dipping down because we need to have enough money. And we also passed in our policies that we can't have anything below 1% in our unrestricted accumulated surplus funds. So we will have to keep an eye on that. We'll have to make sure that we don't dip below that, because then we'll be breaking our policy. So. Yeah, so this is a very interesting graph. Take a look at. You can see where we were in the past here. Any questions? on this? The interesting thing that I just want to mention is that so the province continually asks school boards to spend down their surpluses because it's showing on their books they keep going up. But we still need to make sure that we have enough money to be sustainable. So it's always going to be a balance about, do we have enough to cover emergency funds? But at the same time, the province is pressuring school districts to spend it down. So yeah, it's an interesting conundrum that we're in.
It's just as a comment, because isn't that sort of tie into, if you're going to do a capital project, if you have too much money in your surplus, then they're going to ask you to fund that with your surplus as opposed to a grant. Yeah, that's tied.
Or they could.
Or they
They
could. There's, yeah. potential
Likely
for
they
that.
will.
Okay.
Likely they will. Very likely. Yeah.
So having a gigantic surplus is not necessarily an advantage.
Oh, they'll take it. Yeah. We'll take it for sure.
It's a fine line.
That's right.
Okay.
Boy, and when accountant, says it that strongly, it must be. true.
Yeah, definitely.
Fair.
So this is basically our capital assets here. So this is our capital assets. This is where they're sitting at. So basically you can see that we had additions of $4 million. This is at the beginning of year, this 126. We had additions of 4 million, disposals of 1.4. So in the end, obviously our capital assets went up at the end of the year last year. And I'm just going to go to the next slide here. Now, this is another capital asset schedule. This is another graph. And the reason this one is different because it's net book value. So what that means is that this is the assets minus their amortization. So, when you have a vehicle, it depreciates over time. So for accounting purposes, we have to recognize amortization over the life of the asset. So if you have a vehicle or a building, it depreciates over time. So we actually take the cost of the asset and subtract off the amortization. And that's why, if you're wondering why the two amounts are different from the previous schedule, this is showing what the value is after taking amortization off. So it's actually really not that different from the previous year once you look at that.
Did we add a bunch of vehicles or?
Yeah, we had some buses.
We
We had a bunch of buses last year. that we purchased.
Because one year to the next, it went up in value by $500,000.
Yeah, it's from the buses pretty much.
Okay.
Well, actually, like Ian does have like he has a small budget. I think it's $90,000 for vehicles a year, just for like to buy like vans and stuff for his maintenance
Yeah,
stuff.
so we part of the fleet. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's part of, he also has that as well. So I think we bought a van last year, something like that. Anyway, I think we bought a van plus most of it's buses though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's a good question.
Why? Just because most things depreciate, right? So.
Yeah, all of those things. And I just want to mention the only thing that we actually don't depreciate is land, because we're not allowed to for public sector accounting standards. So even though you see the land went down here, it's because we disposed of the CMOS, the Coast Mountain Outdoor School. So that's why it went down. Otherwise, land always pretty much stays. Well, you always see it the same, staying on the financial statements every year.
That just makes sense.
And okay, so these are some of the capital additions we had over the year. So we had Howe Sound Secondary and Garibaldi Highlands roofing upgrades. And we had Valley Cliff Elementary and Whistler Secondary HVAC projects. And then, as I mentioned, there were some school buses purchased here as well. There's a bunch of other little additions in here. So, I mean, the schools also are buying equipment and stuff like that too. So I'm not going to go through all of the additions, but those are just the major ones. Okay. So this is a schedule of revenue here. Okay, so this dark blue is the operating revenue. This lighter blue is our special purpose funds revenue, and then there's capital revenue here, the 3.8 million. And then further, so basically these colors over here, this is the operating revenue is broken down into these other colors here. So this lighter green is our grant revenue, this darker green is other revenue, and then the orange is international. So that's the color coding there. Any questions on that? And this is just another way of looking at the revenue broken down. Okay. So this is a little bit just similar to like the next page here is just going over some variance analysis for the revenue. So let me just see here. So basically overall our revenue was higher by 3.5 million from the previous year. Revenue changes. So we saw funding for the labor settlement, which everybody is aware of. We had an increase to targeted funds funding.
So because we have a internal restriction on Aboriginal, like on the targeted funding.
Yeah.
Is that shown in our charts as restricted or unrestricted?
Restricted.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know we internally do it, but I just didn't know, like, it's not required.
Yeah.
But we-
So anything that were like, even like the family affordability fund, that's all restricted, like anything that has a special purpose, that's all restricted.
But those, some of the items are restricted by the ministry.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then the targeted fund, we as a district committed to the district.
Okay. I thought it was restricted by the ministry too.
I think so.
It's targeted, but yeah.
But we can say,
But
this
we-
is going
yes.
towards Aboriginal education, or this.
I see.
But it's
Yeah.
not specific, but we
Absolutely.
committed to
Good.
putting it in to targeted funding, and the south and north workout was budget.
That's what.
Hmm.
Jefferson's wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, so good. And so we had some changes in tuition revenue, investment income was higher due to higher interest rates, which really benefited us. And as we mentioned, we had those extra funds that we got money for. So we got money for student, family and affordability, early
So,
care learning.
Sorry,
Sure.
what do we invest in, and what are we investing?
So that's actually just like from our bank accounts. It's just the money that, like the money we have sitting in our bank account.
Mhm.
That's the interest earned.
Okay.
So the schools each have a bank account as well. So that also includes their interest on their bank accounts. And then we also have a bank account.
So
Correct.
that would be reflective of the district or of the entire district, including schools?
In the entire district, including schools.
$100,000?
Yep.
Sweet.
Yeah, yeah, they went up. So the rates went significantly up over the last year, and actually they've gone up even more than like in this year, so it'll be interesting to see what the numbers are.
Now, can we spend that on whatever we want?
That's unrestricted. That
It goes in our unrestricted
Yeah.
and we can allocate.
Yep. Yeah. Yes, so yes, we had money for all of these things, early childhood educator, dual credit, CEF, we had 3 million higher. We had some extra surplus money from the previous year, so from mental health, seamless day. Small decrease in other revenue due to international program ancillary revenue, donations and grants. And then amortization of deferred capital. So. Any questions on revenue? Can I move on to expenses? Good. Okay.
We're good, yeah.
So. overall, our expenses were higher by 5.52% from the previous year. We negotiated 6.75% in salary increases. So that's 1.6 million in teachers and support staff, and $500,000 for 5 new education assistants. We also spent 0.6 million on substitute staff coverage or to cover absences, and 1 million on supplies and services due to inflation. We also had, we had an increase in transportation costs of 0.2 million in the previous year, and that's due to driver and bus shortages. So we actually had to contract out buses and drivers to help with the situation last year because we couldn't get buses or we were short buses and we were short drivers. So that was a little bit expensive for us.
I didn't know we were short buses.
Yeah.
I knew the driver situation.
Yeah, we're short buses too. We've been trying to get the ministry to give us buses. We asked for those 2 emergency buses last year. They approved it, but we didn't get it until like March or something like that. So we were using Diversified, like a contractor to drive the bus for us. Like they were providing the bus and the driver last year. And so, like, as I mentioned, we did have some extra, we had an increase in our capital assets. So due to that, we had higher amortization costs, small amount, 0.2 million. So this graph here shows our expenses. So instructions in this light blue color, district administrations is darker blue color. And in green here is operations and maintenance, and then transportation and housings. We don't offer housing, so it's only transportation costs in here, but we have to call it transportation and housing because that's the ministry's wording for how they have their financial statements laid out. So we have to follow their wording there. And that's just the same information. This is like the same information, just showed in another way. So expenses by object. So this is here, like this dark blue colors, total salaries. This green is employee benefits here. This is teacher salaries here.
Services and supplies, we should switch the.
Oh, the services and supplies here. Okay, thank you. Trying to understand this myself. And then amortizations here. And then the salaries are broken down here. The different kinds of salaries. So this one's the teacher salary, this 29.5. 3.3 is salaries of principals and vice principals. And then orange here is educational assistants. And then this dark blue here, support staff. Pink is other professionals, and then this green one here is salary substitutes. So actually that's quite high, the salary substitutes one. So as we mentioned, our sick leave was pretty high. So. And
What's other professionals?
so other professionals, where's that one here?
Yes.
It is.
That's district staff, right?
Okay.
Other professionals?
Trustees.
Trustees are in there as well?
Yep. You're in there too.
So I meant us. This group.
I hate other categories.
Just say what it is.
Just go and dump things in there. Right?
Yeah.
I can't figure it out. It's going to others.
So this graph is very interesting. Because this is FTE by category over the last 10 years. So teachers, you can see it's gone up. I'm sorry, yeah. And then the support staff is this one here, the dark blue. The orange one is education assistants. And then other professionals is pink. And then principals and vice principals is green. So it's interesting to see this, right? See what's actually happening.
Very interesting.
Mhm.
I just look, I'll just point out, because I know sometimes folks look at support staff and sort of the EAs and think, how come they're not rising up the same as teachers way up there? And of course, that's because one of the things we do, and we could eventually get to 4 on our collaborative support model. So we hire teachers to support students in classrooms in lieu of composition language that's in other districts that would necessitate the hiring of more EAs. And 58 of the 60 districts, and in our district, because we don't have composition language, we're able to have the ministry help pay for our collaborative support model.
Okay, so I'm starting to, I know I do have like still a bit more to go through and that I have another report to go through. So basically that's it. So that the last, thing here is if somebody has a question in regards to this report, they can contact me. There's my contact information. So is there any questions? Is it okay if I move on to the 3-year financial plan? Any questions from
I'm
anyone?
not seeing any trustee questions.
Just gonna stop sharing here for a second.
I think I might have questions that I will ask at this point rather than later, if you don't mind, Rebecca. So just these are questions based on the last 2 reports that you've shared with us, Danielle. Thank you for that, by the way. So one of the things I was wondering is that if there's any way to actually stabilize cash and cash equivalents. So it just is something that cannot be controlled. I'd be curious to see what it looked like over 10 years, but if it's something that can't really be stabilized, then maybe it doesn't matter. I really don't like to see big differences year to year, but if that's one of those line items that we should just always expect variation because of payments coming and going at times that are unpredictable.
I think for that one, like I could definitely share like a 10-year thing with you, but honestly don't think it's because the amount is actually quite large that's sitting in the bank accounts. I don't think there's anything to be concerned about. If it was like you were looking at like we didn't have very much in our bank account, then I would be concerned, but I don't think it's an issue. If that makes
Okay.
sense.
Thank you.
Provide a quick example, because I know we talked, I had the same
Sure.
similar question. And I know, for example, we have community partnerships with various folks, including our First Nations, and in an LEA, for example, we may have our own financials around a date where we'd want to have included funding. And if we haven't received that from whatever community partner group we're speaking about at that moment in time, it's going to show as less as deficit. So it could be $1 million, 2 million. We know we're going to get the money eventually. There could be sometimes the ministry will also say, oh, we're going to give you the payment in March, and then they change it till July. So I think that's the point I wanted to make, because I had the similar question and learned that it's because when the district receives the monies isn't always when we think we're going to get it at the snapshot date. So, but I think, we can certainly share the variability of that over time, and it's probably going to be a graph like this for that reason.
Yeah, and like, I mean, we have
But-
$15 million in our bank accounts. Like, that's pretty healthy. If you think about it, like our total operating budget's like, 73 million. That's very healthy. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to add about the cash. So instead of looking at it's standalone item, we can use ratio that is widely used in financial analysis as current ratio, which is current assets, which are mostly cash, divided by current liabilities. We can add it in our financial statement discussion analysis to show that we do have enough cash to pay our current liabilities. And because the higher cash, it means the higher accounts payable. The lower cash, the lower accounts payable. So as long as we have enough, and it should be more than 1.0, so it means we are in good health in terms of cash. So maybe it's an idea for little changes for financial statement discussion analysis for next year.
Sure, thank you for that, Alina. And if I may follow up that question with a statement. So for the benefit of the public, we've had prior to this meeting, and perhaps you'll go into this later on, Danielle, in detail, but we've had a meeting with our financial auditors for the benefit of the board, because there's some risk with discussing all of that in detail in the public realm. That was a closed meeting, but we do have auditors looking at what's happening in terms of finance and then reporting back to the board on a regular basis so that we have an understanding of what's going on behind the scenes and reassurance that there's nothing of concern despite fluctuations in cash and cash equivalents, which may cause concern for lay people. But the board is definitely in the loop in terms of looking at what the auditors are looking at. I had a couple more questions, if you don't mind.
Okay.
So the first one was why 1 million for the variance analysis. I think Chris caught one thing that was just below 1 million, just for the future, just to comment if there was maybe a slightly smaller number that could be used for future variance analysis. Analyses, yeah.
Yeah, we could look at that.
And then coming back to something that we discussed earlier, if there's any way to make our financial statements, and I think that they are by design comparable to other districts, is that correct? Like, is there variation in what we're doing so that what we're reporting on is an apple to apple comparison with other school districts? Or do we have leeway, like Chris was saying, some expenses are put under administration, but other school districts may choose to have them under different line items. So I think for the benefit of the public to not be confused, if we can move towards standardized reporting, which I think is happening anyway.
Just to speak on that, so all school districts have to follow public sector accounting standards. That's just, and that's what we get audited on. So we all have to follow that as it, like, there's no way for us to have be exactly aligned with what every other school district is doing, because they may be much larger and they may do things differently. They may be decentralized, they may be centralized, they have all different makeups, and they have, they're all very different. So I can't say that our accounting is going to be exactly the same because of that. And it would be really, really hard to standardize that across, however, I don't know whether there's 70 of them, right? I could look into seeing what other districts are doing, but one of the things that we have to think about is one of the accounting principles we have is called consistency. And so you're supposed to try to stay kind of consistent with what you're doing yearly, because otherwise you can't really compare year after year. So that's something we have to take into account. It doesn't mean that we can't reclassify things. We can, but that means we would have to restate prior years, and it's a lot of work for accountants to do that kind of work. So yeah,
that's totally reasonable, Danielle. And perhaps a solution to the problem is just to make sure that when we're reporting out on these things, we make sure that people understand that there is variation across districts. And this is how we do it here.
I'll just add on, if I may, that
Yeah.
one piece that we think, of course, is not all districts were successful or chose to put the grant in for early learning. We did, and again, that's a funded position along with other funding. So our district vice principal position, for example, is fully funded by the ministry, but that is included in district administration. And so if the district didn't have that as part of their service, as part of the grants they were given, then it may look like, oh, again, there would be less proportional cost because they don't have those grant positions that we were very successful in and thrilled to have for the sake of our ground as a case.
Anything else?
thank you. Okay, so I have 13 minutes to quickly go over the financial plan, but also we have to slide Ian in too. So I'm going to be super brief here. So I apologize for that.
It is going into a break, so we could extend, but
Okay,
a break would be nice, so.
it'd be nice. Yeah. Okay, but this one, it's I think a little bit easier to go through. So, okay. So this is the three-year financial plan. So at the June meeting, Elena Meta, our finance director, presented the concept of us having to prepare a multi-year financial plan. So this is kind of planning ahead into the future, as kind of what Rebecca alluded to. We have to make sure that we're not continually dipping into our surpluses. So this is a new requirement by the government, and this is our first year preparing this document. So this document itself does not have to be approved by the board, but the ministry is looking for something in our minutes to show that it's been discussed. So. Okay, so. Elena
Sorry,
and Chris.
sorry to go back to jumping in, but I think for the public and for the board, the reason is that while we are required to provide this, we are not held to. We're not held to it, so that if we're off in
Yeah.
year 2 or year 3, there's no penalty to the board or to the district. So that's why it doesn't require that approval, because it's not we're accountable for producing it. We're not accountable for the actual amounts, although we do our best to, you know, be somewhat accurate, but there will be changes.
Yeah.
So, sorry, I mentioned that's the reason why it doesn't require approval.
Mm.
Thank you.
Thank you, that's good, yeah. Okay, so the purpose of this report is to make sure it aligns with our strategic plans, our education plan, and make sure that our finances align with that. And also to make sure that our school district is sustainable financially. So we're looking ahead to 3 years. Okay. So many of you have heard or are aware of the school district timeline. So basically in December and January, the budget survey goes out to stakeholders. And in February, the information is looked at and it's reviewed at our partner group meeting, where all stakeholders are invited to review the results of our budget survey. And the needs and the results from that are analyzed and prioritized at that meeting. And then also in February, the school district, along with the schools, prepare our enrollment estimates and submit them to the ministry. And that sets up our funding for the next year. In March, the government announces their funding announcements for what's going to get funded in the budget. And so that's when we can start using those numbers to prepare our budget for next year. And then in June, our annual budget is adopted. In September, we have the new school year starting. In September, October, our enrollment data is finalized. And then we submit our 1701 to the ministry in October. And then in February, we do an amended budget with the new enrollment numbers. So any questions on the timelines? This just goes over the different budget fund types. I've kind of gone over them actually in the financial discussion analysis. So there's operating funds, special purpose funds, and capital funds. And we just put together some of the strategic priorities here. So I'm not going to go through all of them because Chris Nicholson, our superintendent, will be going through them tonight as well in the open board meeting in the year ahead. But basically the high level strategic priorities are obviously student learning, equity, truth and reconciliation, mental health and well-being, and community engagement. So this next page here shows the funded enrollment, the FTE from 2016, and then it shows like what the estimates are as well. So in green here is the actual enrollments from 2016 to this year. So you can see how they were. And then this darker blue is actually what we prepared our budget on. So if you listen in tonight, you'll be able to hear a little enrollment update from Mr. Lorette. See where we're at with that. And then the next two columns here are what the projected amounts for the next 2 years. And just so everybody's aware, the projected amounts that are in there are based on the enrollment amounts that we received from our demographer.
We don't anticipate a lot of.
It's pretty flat. Yeah, so there's like a slight dip here. And then it goes back up again. So, but we'll see because we'll be adjusting it every year based on. What the,
Overall, it's been,
Mhm.
wow.
it's been pretty flat here, so.
It's interesting how the graph is structured. It looks like we've tripled in size.
Yeah.
16, 17.
Yeah, because it starts at 4,400 down here. Okay, and the next graph is our per student funding amount. So this is just what's coming from the ministry. So it's actually been pretty flat as well, if you look at it. And so the green is the actual, what has happened in the past. And blue is based on the current year's budget. And then the two lighter blues are the estimated amounts from the ministry in the next 2 years. And also just so everybody's aware, these two amounts are coming from the ministry. The ministry has a tool on their website where we can enter in our enrollment. And then it can tell us, like, it gives us how much they're estimating their grant amount to be. So we will see, you know, what it ends up actually being. Hopefully it's that much or more. And the next graph here is on our international education. So the gray one here is the FTEs. So these are the number of students here. And then international, the revenue amount is orange. So you can see we obviously took a big dip here during COVID, and then it's come back up, but it actually hasn't come up quite as much. So we're still haven't fully recovered from COVID, as you can see here. And it's
One of the issues there is homestay. Homestay is probably the most significant challenge in terms of international.
yeah, so basically we aren't able to, like, we would be able to accept more students, but we do not have enough homestay families. So that is limiting the amount of international students we're able to accept and our international revenue. So if anybody's interested in having homestay family, please apply.
My kids can't afford to leave homes.
I understand that too.
Yeah, everybody.
And then we've seen, like, this is basically the same graph that we saw in the financials discussion and analysis. However, it just has the budgeted amount and also the estimated for the next 2 year amount here as well. So that's, you can see it's kind of flat, but it's basically the same graph that we already saw. For staffing levels. Okay, so at the end of this, there's basically a forecast, like a 3-year forecast. And I just wanted to go over some of the assumptions that were made to get to that. So for this year, the 2023-24 year, we had salary increases of 6.75%. We also estimated 3% for 2004-2005 and 2% for 2005-2006 for salary increases. So we actually don't know. Those are estimates. We don't know 100% that that's what those will be. And the 2025-26, our collective agreements would have ended already. So we'll have to negotiate that at that time. The amounts also include an estimate of 0.11% for movement through teacher grids. And just as I mentioned before, that the following years are based on the enrollment numbers are based on what the demographer provided us. Inflation for supplies and services were estimated to be at 3% for 2024-25. And no, I'm still on this page. Yeah, I'm right here.
Okay.
Yeah. So here I'm at inflation right here. So inflation's at 3% for 2024-25 and 2% for 25-26. So those numbers, the 3% and the 2%, that's based on what the Bank of Canada is projecting inflation to be. So it's all, like, literally just all we can do to estimate. Who knows what it will be? So as I mentioned, 25, 26, 2% for salary, and then for capital spending, we just estimated it to be about 700,000 for these 2 years. So the next page, this is the main big page here. So we have actual column. That's from last year, budget column. And then we have 2 estimate columns, the next 2 years out. So the graphs are based on what the ministry gave us. And the salaries are based on what I've already mentioned. Services and supplies down here is based on including inflation there. And there's nothing specifically I wanted to go over in here because I went over what we did for the assumptions, but I just wanted to draw your attention to the bottom line here. So, so based on this, so this 23-24 year we're in right now, the budget that we passed was showing the original first budget showed that we were using up 911,000 of accumulated surplus. So that's the original, original budget we did. We still have to do the amended budget for this year. So that's for this 23-24. And then going forward, it's showing based on those assumptions I already showed you that we would have to use up 2.1 million from accumulated surplus. And then the next year would be 724,000. So end result, sort of Elena put together an estimate of where we would be at with accumulated operating surplus down here. She's just showing how it would go here. And so basically, I think Elena, you can let me know your thoughts on this as well, but this is kind of like we don't want to get below this, basically. So we'll have to carefully keep an eye on what our enrollment is, because what's happening is if our enrollment does decline, we have these salary increases that are continue to go up. And so we'll have to make sure that we can balance the budget, because the salary increases will continue to go up. And if our revenue is declining, we'll have to cut somewhere. So we'll have to figure that out. So it's going to be a balancing exercise. So that's it.
But some of it will just be by attrition, because if the enrollment goes down, then we have teachers in term positions, because we need teachers to ensure that there's folks and support staff in front of kids. So if there's less kids, then the number of our term positions or our part-time positions or one-year term positions won't be as plentiful, because there won't necessarily be the students to require them.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chris.
Yeah. So that we wouldn't maintain the same staffing levels as kids go down, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Just a quick question, and you might not have the answer to this, but when we look at our staff across the district, obviously people who are more senior are making higher salaries, and they will eventually retire, and new teachers will come in who are beginning their careers at the start of the salary grid. Do we have projections on that kind of movement?
Yeah, we do know that overall our employees are on the more they're not as
Experienced?
higher. No.
Less experienced.
Yeah, so they're on the younger side. So
And staffing is based on an average cost per teacher until
That's right.
factors in.
Oh, okay,
yes.
okay.
That's-
All right, then that's kind of a moot point then, really.
No, it's good. It's a great
Okay.
question.
but we'll definitely be keeping an eye on all of this stuff, and we'll have to adjust as needed.
Okay.
Any questions on that?
What I did notice is we forgot to make some recommendation after each report.
Oh, man, you did.
Now,
Thank
We
you.
should do that right now.
we can do that right
I-
now.
I have a question, if I may. Insurance expenses, they seem to have almost doubled in the project. Well, they've gone up significantly. Is there something I should know about, or we should know about? go
Insurance has
from
gone up everywhere. There's been there's
Okay.
so many natural disasters. There's so many more insurance claims, even across all school districts. It's just going up everywhere.
Wildfires. So we're all
Wildfires,
part of
flooding.
It's not directly related
Yes.
to any specific incident. It's just.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So we have a couple of recommendations. We can start with 7A. Anyone is prepared?
So I can do that one. I think this is the right one, that the Finance Committee recommends the Board of Education approve the audited financial statements for the year end June 30th, 2023 as presented.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Second,
Thank you, Lisa. Are there any objections? Seeing and hearing none, that's carried. 7B,
you want me to take that?
sure.
That the Finance Committee recommends the Board of Education approve the financial statement discussion and analysis document as presented.
Thank you, Lisa. Second by April. Any objections? Seeing and hearing none, we can move on. So are we done with you?
You're done with me.
Now we're
Sorry, I'm
moving to
sure
Ian.
you're all sick of hearing from me.
So that means, Ian, you are up next. You'll need a microphone, yes.
Okay, so this is, the summary of.
Do you want me to pull up your attachment for you or?
Sure.
There we go.
Oh, thank you, Ian.
No worries. Yeah, so this is a summary of our submission to the ministry for our minor capital requests for the 2024-25 capital plan submission. So typically we submit similar projects every year. We maintain a list of different projects that are listed in priority, and then we continue as projects get approved, we priority list accordingly. So starting at the top, we have just for a little bit more information, the ministry permits us to submit 5 SEP projects and 5 CNCP projects every year. So that's why we have those 10 projects. Thought we might as well get as many as we can in our list. And that's an increase over previous capital plan submissions. They're allowing us to submit a few more. So the SEP is the school enhancement program, and there are things like boilers, roofs, major windows, stuff like that. So the number one priority we have this year in this year's plan for next year is a boiler plant upgrade, phase 1 for Statmas. And that is the last school in our district now to receive a boiler plant upgrade. We've managed to upgrade all of the boiler plants in all our facilities across the district since 2014. So this is the final one on the list. So that's been a pretty neat achievement. We've been able to upgrade our HVAC equipment in all schools, and we're continuing down this, and Statmas is the last one. Number 2 on the SEP list is Valley Cliff Elementary, and we're continuing to repair roofs as we see necessary. So there's targeted roof replacement. It does not represent full roof replacement there. It's just a portion. We're also looking at window replacement at Mamquam Elementary. Then we have a window replacement identified at Statmas. Again, it's not, those are full window replacements, unlike the roofs. And then House on Secondary, we're looking at doing some electrical upgrades, which includes massive LED lighting upgrade. And that actually will help reduce our electrical energy consumption as well. So it helps with us to meet our sustainability goals. The CNCP program is the carbon neutral capital program. We have 5 projects listed there. Number 1 on the list is to complete the ongoing Whistler Secondary CNCP project that we were funded for this year. When we went to tender that project, all the quotes came in over the estimated budget, which was provided to us by our consultant. So cost escalation, supply chain issues, and all those things have added to increased costs across the province. So many districts are in the same boat. So we're asking for more money to complete that project. We were short by about 300,000 under the original budget. When the consultant revised and gave us the updated numbers, they've actually gone up by another 200,000. So that's the anticipated cost increase from last year to this year over that. So it continues to go up. So that would be our number 1 project under CNCP. And these are projects that help us reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, reduce our natural gas use typically. So they're great projects to help us with our sustainability goals. So number 2 on that is Mount Coolum Elementary. That is phase 2 of the current project that's underway at Mount Coolum Elementary. So we have a boiler plant upgrade ongoing right now. The phase 2 of that is the energy efficiency component, where we install air source heat pumps, which helps us to draw heat out of the air to heat the school rather than burning natural gas, which reduces our greenhouse gas emissions. Pemberton Secondary is number 3 on the list in the CNCP. That's a massive project. It's a geothermal system from scratch. It's a very expensive but we continue to push it forward. Phase 1 is 1.3 million nearly. The overall project, overall 3 phases, will be just under 5 million. So it's a pretty big project, but it will result in a very significant drop of our greenhouse gas emissions. Also, as an aside, Pemberton Secondary is on propane, which has a higher particulate emission than natural gas. So it'd be, win-win in 2 ways there for that one. And then we have a couple of window replacements, and we can have window replacements and boiler plants in either SEP or CNCP. When we replace windows, we increase the efficiency of a building. So we do reduce heat loss through the windows, which reduces our natural gas use. So we can show a savings in our natural gas reduction or window replacement. So Squamish Elementary is identified there. We did a big portion of Squamish Elementary this year. It should really help with our heat loss through that school, and actually occupant comfort should be increased as well. And then we have window replacement identified again at Valley Cliff Elementary under CNCP. This year we're including again we typically include 2 projects under the playground enhancement program, and that is to provide inclusive, accessible playground equipment to our schools where none exists currently. And it also ties in typically with replacing aging and worn out playground equipment. So we prioritize the list based on where the greatest need is, and typically where the playground equipment is in the worst condition. So we have 2 schools on that list for this year, and that's Squamish Elementary and Valley Cliff. Food infrastructure program. This is a brand new program this year. And so this, we are allowed to submit at least 1 project up to $100,000. So we are including 2 in our list this year. We don't want to miss the opportunity to go after the funds that are available. We may not actually use or go for the full 100,000. We're waiting on quotes for equipment. Still waiting for a list from House on Secondary. Like everything else, the ministry will prioritize based on need throughout the province, but we're hoping to see some equipment come our way through that program. And that is for things, minor upgrades like, it can be things like purchasing a refrigerated truck so we can deliver food from one of our kitchens to other schools. It's buying kitchen equipment like new ranges or industrial toasters, industrial dishwashers, and things like that. It's to support existing kitchens and existing programs. It's not to enhance or build new space and things like that. And then at the end here, we have, I think it's 8 buses on the list. We're not anticipating to get 8 buses, but we want to have them on the list for the ministry so that they're aware of the condition of some of our buses. Our buses typically don't age out or mileage out. They have most of them experience rust issues. So we either spend a lot of money on expensive repairs, or we ask the ministry to replace the bus. However, we do have 3 buses that are aging out under this year's plan. Those are guaranteed replacements. So we should see 3 buses out of the list, which will be amazing, and it'll help Paul out terrifically. And then to speak to approvals, we don't anticipate getting 10 projects under SEP or CNCP approved. We typically get 2 SEP projects a year and 1 CNCP project. We're hoping that they support the shortfall that we had with Whistler. And then we're hoping that they'll support the Statmas boiler plant upgrade, and then targeted roof would be number 2. So we're anticipating about 3 projects there, probably about the 3 of the buses out of the 8 that are listed. And then we should expect to see at least one of the FIP projects supported. The playground enhancement program, typically we see a project approved every other year. So we had one approved this year at Garibaldi Highlands, and that will be completed this year under the provincial fiscal. So we may not see a playground enhancement program approved under this budget, but likely under the next. And that's all I got.
Okay. Any questions? We have 2 minutes
Ian,
before-
I always love your reports. For my ignorance on newbie, the report that you've given us, this is provincial funded and not out of we're seeking a grant. Yeah, it's not.
Yes, that's
A
correct.
1/3,
Yeah.
1/3 like municipalities. It's a full on, they're covering the expense. Yeah.
That's right. This is asking the ministry to support these projects and provide us with 100% of the budget that we're asking for.
Fantastic. I love when you pull these together. I really like these, Ian. Thank you.
No problem.
Hey, any other questions? Seeing none, then there is a motion there.
I'll give Ian his motion that the Finance Committee recommends the Board of Education approve the 2024-2025 minor capital plan as presented.
Thank you, Lisa. Any second for that?
I think it was years ago.
Carter?
You read it?
The wrong year.
Did you do it right? I'll second it.
Yeah, that's what she said, right?
Yeah,
Sorry, my fault. I'll second it though.
thank you. Any objections? Seeing and hearing none, and that's carried. Do we have any questions of clarification from the public? While you're checking that, I just want to thank Ian for the report.
Nothing.
I think, okay. So with that, then we've completed the business of this agenda and we are adjourned and we are jumping right back into.
Sorry, when are we back?
Right now.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I have to make a cup of tea.